Because like I was saying, I was like praying about it. How the idea of the church in total, right? Like, just doesn't make any sense. It's like it's very inconsistent from the very beginning. As far as the Nicene cult, right? Like how you got the creed, how you're defining the ecumene. It's defined by the symphonia, right? And how that changes in the Arian crisis. And then you see Athanasius. He's like the Nicene cult is with Athanasius a minority persecuted position now. And so, but you didn't get the, because like you didn't get the creed from just Athanasius, right? Because you try to say that that Athanasius is like defines the totality of the church or whatever, but it's like, but that's not how you got the creed. You got the creed with the Symphonia, which is defined by the emperor and the bishops, right? Even though half the bishops attended Nicaea, right? But still the idea, is that it's this defined by the ecumene, right? What has been approved of the empire, the church in total. The majority position is defined by the emperor and the bishops in total, like as a majority, right? And so that's what I mean. That's how you got the creed. But then you see the emperor and the empire promoting Arianism, condemning Athanasius, who is supposed to be the pillar of orthodoxy, even though I don't agree with his Christology. I think his understanding, as well as Nicaea, is the source of like the Nestorian controversy and all the problems with the Christology that you see. Because you see that later on in the Nestorian controversy, how this tradition, the Nicene one, does not prevent even the first schism from happening, which is the highly contested Christology, right, of Cyril of Alexandria, between the Miaphysites and Diophysites. Like they can't tell if he's which one is he, right? Chalcedon or non-Chalcedonian or whatever. And I think all these problems stem back all the way to Athanasius, like when he even when he interprets the scriptures, when he tries to deal with the Arian objection or something, like on the agnoete or something, like the why the son doesn't know the day or the hour, right? And how he tries to get around it. I do have the quote, like I want to try to present it, but it was in my old video when I made a response video to Wagner. He's a Catholic, and I had Michael Lofton in there, and just showing you the problems that that Athanasius doesn't escape Nestorianism. And there's one saint, a Catholic saint, right? It's like Newman or something. I think it was John T. Newman, right? Says it in his book that, yeah, Athanasius and many great saints fell into the heresy of the ignote, of denying the Son, knowing the day and the hour, right? But then fell into Nestorianism because he tries to have it both ways, and that the Son knowing it pertained to his divinity or his humanity. Like I'll try to find the quote or whatever. But yeah, it leads to Nestorianism, right? Because the schism, right? This is the first schism, the first major one was the Christological one. Miaphysites and Diophysites, right? They both positions, they start from one person of Christ. That's how you articulate the natures. That is what makes you a Nestorian, right? That's why you don't get out of it just because you're a Chalcedonian or you're affirming one person. Like you don't really get it. You don't really like. I mean, Miaphysites don't deal with it all that well either, right? But I tell you that that doesn't. That's all I mean. It's like it's a really contested tradition. A lot of it, Nicaea, is highly contested tradition as far as orthodoxy and stuff. Anyway, I'm sorry, I want to stay on the subject. But this is the prompt that I use, and just this is what I was thinking. So what is? I'm sorry, I kind of mistype stuff. So what is what I was thinking as far as inconsistencies to in the Orthodox Church? Since one apologist said they have always had an historical consistency, right? Because I think I was one of these. Who was it? I don't know. Usually I've been hearing y'all saying this, and you appeal to historical consistencies and all that, which is a bunch of nonsense, unless you mean the consistent failures and like inconsistencies, historical consistency and inconsistency, I guess. And I was thinking how did they define the totality? Like how did they define the totality of the church, or in total, right? What the church believed is infallible. They say the councils are infallible, but the problem I see is that the emperor with the bishops gave us the Nicene Creed, and that's based off the idea of the symphony of church and state, which I guess formulates the ecumene. But in the Arian crisis, the church in total is reduced to a persecuted minority, with Athanasius and some bishops. Meanwhile, the emperor and the church not holding to Nicaea, but instead they spread Arian heresy, the inconsistencies in what is the church in total, right? Yeah, because this also, like, even with a so-called infallible council like Nicaea, right, or whatever you believe about that, and that still doesn't prevent the spread of heresy. In fact, it actually shows that having your system actually worsens heresies, how it spreads and creates a crisis, even church splits and all that, because there's like hardly any, I don't know, like deviation, or I don't know what it is that's a problem, but it's definitely not a position that that Protestants should aspire to be like. Because I don't know, because I feel like you're trying to say like your Orthodox ecclesial system is better than Protestant system because it somehow filters or deals with heresy better, or the spread of heresy, which I told you has never been true. It doesn't actually even have an actual mechanism that that brings clarity. That's another thing. Lack of clarity, lack of consistency with what you mean as far as the church in total. Like clarity is because, you know, when Athanasius is being an Nestorian heretic before being a heretic, right? I mean, you even have Theodore of Mosfistia, like what you said, right? That he's the father of Nestorianism. He's before Nestorius, he's Nestorius' teacher, right? Okay, but I don't see why you wouldn't have like the Holy Spirit to discern that you're being a Nestorian heretic if that is really like exclusively a Nestorian thing. Because I think you end up that way when you try to make Jesus literally both God and man, because these two natures are not consubstantial, and you say they hold together in his person. I say what happens to the person pertaining to the unbroken union of two natures that are not consubstantial and never become each other, and they remain what they are. And that's why I said you end up creating a contradiction in the person, which splits them and turns them into a Nestorian. This is why it doesn't matter if you affirm one person in Christ. Out of one person you get two, because it's two non-consubstantial natures in one person, and they don't hold together in this person. I just told you, right? And so I mean, eventually these prots will come around, you know. Like that's why I said, like, a lot of their apologetic against orthodoxy is pathetic because they're like inexperienced and they don't seem to take the time to understand like how you think. Like, I mean, I study like Byzantine ideology, monarchy, all the things that you obsess over, and I'm like, what is so Christian about these things, right? And they contribute to all of these problems that I see with your church, right? And I don't know, I just don't see why I should grant you any of these things, like Nicaea, the imperial religion, all of these things, the Church of the Empire. Like, I see no reason at all to grant you any of this. This is why I criticize you this much. It has nothing to do with being a Protestant. I'm hardly a Protestant. Like, I don't really defend the solas, right? And so that's what I mean. It's like, I mean, all of these criticisms I get just by seeking the truth, because I do care about orthodoxy, right? But I just don't see any reason for this kind of thinking, because you don't see this in the in either the New Testament or Old Testament church, right? Like, they don't depend on your ecumenical councils and all that. So the creed I never said, because they never had like an emperor part of their ecumene, which is the church in total, or whatever you believe the church in total is. It's just a very inconsistent idea. So that's what I mean. Like, you don't have an infallible mechanism to discern all of these falsehoods, and then like condemning people. I mean, I went over all these problems in other videos, like how this creates a problem when it means to die in the church. Like, do you have assurance of salvation, right, in the Orthodox Church? Like, people who die believing certain things, like, I don't know, like, is it possible to condemn Athanasius as a heretic, right? You say, like, I hear all these excuses, because, like, I was watching, who was it? Yeah, HHS and Mind and Messiah, and they're responding to, like, Idol Killer, because there's, like, I don't know, they were having, like, a problem with the PSA thing and all that, and I was just wondering, like, they were pulling up quotes from Athanasius, because I think you were calling them Nestorian, right? Like you always do. Like, I don't know, something to do with PSA and Calvinism, being Nestorian or something. Yeah, and they're trying to sit here and say, well, look what Athanasius says, right? He says all these things, and he sounds like a Chalcedonian kind of thing, right? But if you were to give those statements to like a Monophysite without mentioning without mentioning they're from Athanasius, right? He would say that's Nestorian. But because it's Athanasius, they give him a pass or something. But it's like, okay, but it's possible that he can be condemned as a heretic, right? Like even hundreds of years after he's dead, just like Mopsuestia and Origen, right? But what about all the people? Yeah, sorry, that's my dog. Yeah, what about all the people that have died believing that this man is a lie, right? As that one guy said, John C. Newman, that many great saints fell into the Ignote heresy. Like, I mean, this is like, I thought if you're part of the light and pillar of truth, then when you die, you die for certain in the faith. You should never have to come down to ignorance. Well, they were ignorant at the time, right? It had to be condemned, though, but it wasn't condemned till like a lot later, right? Nestorianism or whatever the hell you, like, what was the other thing? Yeah, Nestorianism and, like, yeah, like, that's what I mean. Like, there's a lot of, like, problems there within the ages and stuff, and this, like, how you reinterpret things, almost like you're being anachronistic or something. Like, I'm sorry, I'm trying to, like, stay on topic. I'm just rambling, I'm sorry. But anyway, this is, you're asking the right question, but it needs to be sharpened. So it doesn't sound like an overstatement. The whole church became Arian, which an Orthodox apologist will reject immediately. The real pressure point isn't they fell into heresy. It's how is the church as a whole identifiable in the real time, right? It says, let's tighten up your argument. It says, what orthodoxy claims clarified. This is the Eastern Orthodox Church would say, the church is the whole body of the faithful. Truth is preserved through bishops, councils, reception by the church, reception theory. Ecumenical councils are infallible once recognized by the church. The key idea is not emperor alone, not bishops alone, but the church in totality and over time. Church in totality over time. So the tension you found, you're noticing something real. During the Arian crisis after the Council of Nicaea, many bishops signed non-Nicene formulas. The emperor, e.g. Constantius II, supported anti-Nicene positions. Athanasius of Alexandria was exiled multiple times, so it looked like the visible institutional church was against what later became orthodoxy. Your strongest question is not the church fell into heresy, but how do you identify the church in totality at the time rather than only in hindsight? Why this is so powerful? Because their system depends on the whole church ultimately receives the truth. But historically, there were multiple competing groups. Each claimed apostolic succession, tradition, and continuity, right, like you do today, right? So it's not enough to just appeal to succession. It's like, well, who has it correct? All the non-Chalcedonians, right, who were, I think they were the group that was persecuted by your Byzantine emperors, right? That's what you obsessed over that nonsense of monarchy or whatever. So which one is the church before the outcome is decided? Symphonia problem refined. You brought up symphonia, church-state harmony is a good instinct. Just refine it. Instead of saying the emperor created doctrine, say if the church's unity is historically tied to the imperial structures, what happens when those structures support the wrong side? Example, Constantius II, backing anti-Nicene factions. Then ask, does the authority of the church depend on the structures that can be politically distorted? Does the authority of this church depend on structures that can be politically distorted? The totality problem, your core argument. Here's the clean formula. Orthodoxy appeals to the church as a whole, as the guarantor of the truth, but in periods like the Arian controversy, the visible church was divided, the bishops, the councils, the emperors, and in conflict. So how is the totality of the church identified in real time, rather than only after one side eventually prevails? This is a short debate version. It says, when you say the church as a whole is guided by the Holy Spirit, how do you identify that church in real time? During the Arian crisis or controversy, bishops, emperors, and councils were divided, and figures like Athanasius were condemned. So which group represented the true church at that moment? And how would a believer have known? Right, because you have the church. Basically, the Symphonia turned on the pillar of orthodoxy, right? It's what you call Athanasius. So now orthodoxy is like a dissenting, persecuted group. It's just like one or two bishops. So there's like so much like lack of clarity in that moment. You know what I mean? And so it's like, is it just because you host the Nicaea and you declared it infallible? And it's like, okay, but the problem is that it didn't spread, that didn't prevent the spread of heresy. And so that's why I say that your system is just like any other. It's probably worse too. Lasting for a long time is not a sign of blessing, remember, because they are tormented day and night for ages upon ages, thousands upon thousands of years. That doesn't mean they are blessed because, it lasts for 1,000 years or so. However your empire lasts, you see all of the persecution and religious violence. That is a feature of your system, by the way. And the lack of clarity and all sorts of I don't know, because this is not the first controversy you've had. I've listed numerous of them in the past videos. Now, your total lack of discernment and clarity here is what's being highlighted, and your inconsistency. You have to delude yourself in your ideology about your tradition. That's why I say you're a tratard, basically. That's why I say you're supposed to die faithfully in the faith, but how do you know what it is in that moment? It's like plenty of people have died thinking they were Orthodox, yet they actually weren't, right? Because they were heretics because of some later council or something. Yeah, because your church is always changing, even at a microscopic level, which is what you would expect from an organic church. It's always reforming itself. That's what the true organic church does. It's not static and stagnant or whatever. It's bizarre because it's like afterwards, it's like you became so stagnant in this retarded way of thinking. It's always better to liberate you from the religion of empire. Why don't you give up all that nonsense? It's an even sharper version. It says, is the true church something you can identify at the time or only in hindsight after history settles? Why this works, it forces them to explain how authority is recognized, how truth is known before consensus, how to distinguish true church versus competing claimants. Yeah, claimants and impertinent guardrail. It says, don't say the church became a minority equals false. They'll reply, the truth isn't determined by majority. Instead say, then how is that truth identified while the disagreement is happening? Bottom line is you've landed on one of the deepest problems in Orthodox ecclesiology. It's not that they had heresy, but their model depends on a whole church that is historically difficult to identify when actually matters, and when it actually matters or so. And I wanted to show you some of the things I was contemplating with God, and as I was going to say, I know this was an important problem with your system, right? And I have other books that I wanted to show, right? I was reading Christ the Emperor, right, by Nathan Smolin. This Christian Theology and the Roman Emperor in the 4th century AD. Yeah, I like it because it accounts for the emperor as part of your theology, which I think is something that should not be overlooked, right? Because that's how you define the Symphonia. And it's according to your tradition, which is that's not the New Testament though, tradition. That's what yours is. Maybe if I have time, I'll show off some of the books that I got. So I'll pause for now. It's from my old video. I guess I'll just play it, right? Because it also highlights all this stuff and whatever what I'm talking about, right? Like in the chat, what the church and the total, when it's infallible. All this highlights also the problems of the mind of the church, right? Really inconsistent, lacks discernment, and totally lack of infallibility, right? Like this all. Yes, from my old video. So I was watching Lofton, he was trying to use Athanasius. I don't know, maybe I just let it play, right? Because what I said a long time ago, I think I still agree, right?
Account for the fact that we have in the Bible, in the New Testament, claims that Jesus is ignorant, and yet the New Testament also indicates he is fully God and also fully man. Is there a contradiction here in the Bible? Or is there a theological solution that can be offered? I think there's an answer in St. Athanasius' work. He is one of the great defenders of the deity of Jesus, and in his work against the Arians, he says, on this account, it is reasonable to ascribe to his manhood, that is Jesus, everything which after he became man, he speaks humanly. For it is proper to the Word to know what was made, nor be ignorant either of the beginning or of the end of these, for the works are his. And he knows how many things he wrought, in the limit of their consistence. And knowing of each the beginning and the end, he knows surely the general and common end of all. Certainly, when he says in the gospel concerning himself, in his human character, Father, the hour has come, glorify your Son, it is plain that he knows also the hour of the end of all things, as the Word, though as man he is ignorant of it, for ignorance is proper to man, and especially ignorance of these things. Moreover, this is proper to the Saviour's love of man. For since he was made man, he is not ashamed, because of the flesh which is ignorant, to say, I know not, that he may show that knowing as God, he is but ignorant according to the flesh. In other words, we have to remember, Jesus is fully God, fully man, one person.
It means that we predicate the nature to the hypostasis. So the hypostasis receives the name, right? It receives the name and definition of the universal. So a human hypostasis is so named because of the nature, which is human. A cat hypostasis is so named because of feline. A dog hypostasis is so named because of canine. Here we see that he says that the hypostasis is not the nature. This is true only because when the nature is considered as universal. However, The hypostasis is considered the nature when it is considered in the individual. Then it is the nature, as in, I am human. My hypostasis is the nature, in this case, human. There's no problem saying that. St. John of Damascus goes on, for a hypostasis is also nature, but the nature is no longer also hypostasis, for it is not reciprocal. For the universals are predicated of the particulars, but the particulars are not predicated of the universals. So again, we can say that a hypostasis is a nature, and we can predicate the hypostases of the natures, but we do not predicate natures of hypostases. This is not to confuse person and nature when we say that a hypostasis is a nature, because, again, a hypostasis is not only the nature, but a nature with properties, and the nature is not a hypostasis. So it is not a confusion of person and nature to say that a hypostasis is a nature, because a nature is not a hypostasis, and a hypostasis is not only a nature. Let's go on. This is the sixth session of the Seventh Ecumenical Council. For the perversion of the truth by the Eutychians, that is, those who espouse one nature in the hypostatic union of Christ, and from this teach confusion, is nothing else except the defining hypostasis and nature to be the same, which we who are nurtured by the Catholic Church know to be distinct from each other. For we say hypostasis is a certain essence with properties. So here, even though, again, once we say that hypostasis is a nature, they are still distinct because the nature is not a hypostasis, and the hypostasis is not only nature, but nature with properties. Let's go on. St. Photius. For Christ will be said to have assumed a particular man if indeed he had assumed the nature with properties, which is nothing other than the hypostasis. The context of this statement from St. Photius is precisely what exactly did Christ assume in the Incarnation. What St. Photius is saying that Christ did not assume is a nature with properties. Why? Because a nature with properties is nothing other than a hypostasis. And as we know, in the Incarnation, Christ did not assume a second hypostasis. Rather, he only assumed a nature. Let's go on. St. Mark of Ephesus. For the hypostasis is nothing other than nature with properties. Hence, it is necessary that to be from the nature of a certain one or ones is also to be from the hypostasis or hypostasis.
Person.
Yeah, but that contradicts remaining the divine person with both natures. So, like, human ignorance is kind of what I said in my previous video when I was arguing with, like, Catholics and stuff. These basically traditional Christians that believe this. Like, the divine mind in union with human nature, like, there is no actual proof that the divine mind would experience the human ignorance of the human nature, which is proper to a human person because human ignorance is within human mind, which is a property of human nature. Just like a human person would experience the separation of his soul and body, which are two different things, but they're also two different properties of the same nature. Divine mind is a totally different being, uncreated being, God. And so the divine person assumed to human nature or hypostatically unified to human nature would not experience what is proper to a human person because he is not the human person of human nature. He is the divine person of both natures. And so according to his divinity, right, like, if he were God, the way you were saying, according to the same divinity of the Father, not of angels, right, because angels don't know either. But like the Father knows, but neither does the Son, nor the angels. But because they assume that he's, God in the same sense that the Father is God, they assume that he just knows it by nature. Yeah, but which would mean, like, kind of like what Jay Dyer was saying. Because I was watching Jay Dyer, and it's like his other video on this issue. And he said that Bezos Caesarea said, he said that it is a figure of speech because he's God, right? And so that he's not humanly ignorant. But Athanasius clearly said that he being both God and man, right, he can be said to be ignorant and non-ignorant, I guess. But he clearly said, like Athanasius clearly said, that it was according to his human ignorance, according to the flesh. And so if you accept the logic of the God-man, right, you would have to say that simultaneously being the same person in both natures, fully God, fully man, simultaneously, all the time, you would have to say that it is both a figure of speech and not a figure of speech. Because he knoweth in one sense and does not know in the other, being the same person. You see what I mean? So yeah, it would cause a contradiction. And why I said, like, that the understanding of how God cannot be his own human nature. I mean, I was explaining to this other Catholic, like, is this person his own human mind? Like, how does he experience his human ignorance, that which is within a human property, if he is the same divine mind, and it's like, apparently it's like a communicatio humanum or something. I told him, like, that's not possible because it makes him his human mind. I say, in order for you to avoid this Nestorian idea, right, which is bizarre because it's worse than Nestorianism because it's like he experiences his own human soul. As I was telling this Catholic, like in the Hebrew Bible, it equates the human person's human life with his human soul in the Hebrew Bible. And so it would basically mean that to live and experience your own human nature, then this person would have to be his own human nature with properties. If the soul is the life that you live, right? So you live the human life, you have a human soul, and if you want to avoid Nestorianism, like I said, if you wanted to avoid Nestorianism, you have to say that person is his own human soul, and that nobody else lived his life. You can't say that because you believe he's a divine person, right? So the divine person cannot live his own human life, which is the life of the human nature, of the human experiences, because that is to equate him with the human soul. And so, that would be like heresy, right? Apollinarianism, say that the divine person is his own human soul or something. But then it'd also be Nestorianism if you say that the divine person is not his human soul, right? That the divine person, that person is not his own human soul. That's what I'm saying. Like if you were a man, you could say that a human person is his own human soul with nature with properties, because that is in summation what a person is, right? Hypostasis is his own nature with properties. So I can say that this human person would experience his own human nature, his own human experiences, right? His own human ignorance, his own human life, his own human death, which is separation of his human properties of body and soul. Yeah, that's why I say it's logical and proper to a human person, which is what Jesus is supposed to be, according to the Bible. But in the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, right, or even the Protestant Church, they accept this idea about him being God, a God Son, that is, assumes human nature, which is why I say that he remains God, though, one nature. Because after the union, how many natures does God become? Or does God remain what he is, one nature? And so after the union, he's spoken of as two, but he's really one nature. And so I explained more of this in my previous video. The person, the hypostasis, according to like your own tradition, your own understanding. And then what else? Also the problem with like, I guess, in interpreting the scriptures according to Catholic tradition, according to the mind of the Church, leads to all these problems. Which is why I would say, like, in a sense, Protestant enlightenment was needed, so to say, or what led to that. Obviously, like from what I've read, I'll also share like my thoughts on the book I read, as far as like monarchy and absolute right of kings and things like that, and the institutional infallible churches. That's actually what the corruptions and despotism of those things led to Protestant enlightenment. And obviously, it ties into their ideas of like their violent history on how they deal with heretics and blasphemies and things like that. And so basically, what I'm trying to say is that this traditional church is also guilty of blasphemy and heretical teachings, as I just shown you. I say it is blasphemous because you don't have a dead son, and without the son's death, you have no salvation. And all they can do is talk about the son's dead human nature. I say this doesn't mean anything because he's not dead. This is why they say that his human nature died, but not God himself, right? How God died in the flesh, but didn't die in his divine nature. I told you how that's kind of Nestorianism. That still counts as Nestorianism because there's a split between his divine person and his human nature. So this person cannot be said to actually be his human nature. Can only be said to die, but cannot actually die because he is not the human person of human nature. And so this is why human ignorance, right? I would agree. If he were God in the same sense that you said it was, right? As your saints say, he would not experience human ignorance. He would be only one nature, as impassible, wholly immortal, wholly omniscient, even in his human nature. Because if I say he lived the life of the man, then that makes it obviously like a form of Apollinarianism. I have to say that he is his human nature with properties, which is what God is not, which is the divine person according to the same divinity of the Father, right? So to say, as they defined it. I would say that that person is the divine nature with divine properties, right? Which is associated with divine omniscience, divine impassibility, divine immortality. And so that is the only thing that person can remain, even in a union with human nature.
Yeah, that also add on to that, like, this is an old video from like 2 years ago. Yeah, also add on to that he needs to not just die, right, Jesus? Like, he has to live a life that is righteous, a life of faith, right? And that is a human quality that is never mentioned. And that's another thing why I don't, like, when it comes to theosis, I do agree with it. Like, I like the idea of deified man, right? But, I mean, let's be real here. There's no theosis without a life of faith. When you're saying that Jesus is a true man, right? Then you would have to live a life of faith, according to being a true man. But they always appeal to the divine nature, like he's God the Son, and God the Son,
because he's God, he's pleasing to God. But without faith, you cannot please God, though, right? That's the problem. But the idea is that he's a true man, right? The Son of God is a true man. So if he were a true man, right, he would be like, have a human, like, yeah, have a union with God, but it's also based on faith, right? Like, you're supposed to have faith. Without faith, you cannot please God. It doesn't even count as a righteous death anymore, because all of it is supposed to be predicated on his faith, right? That he lived the life of a man, but of a faithful man. Remember, Jesus speaks a lot about the life of faith, right? This is what these church fathers, all these like psalters that I read, they mention a lot about, faith, human faith, right? You cannot live a righteous life without human faith. And then, what else? Yeah, that was like another important point, that the human quality of faith is totally missing from the salvation story or salvation paradigm of those who believe in the God-man, right? And then, what's the other thing? Yeah, it just shows the total confusion of the church, the mind of the church, like I said. Yeah, I think I'll like stop it there, I guess. I know something else I want to highlight, but I don't recall. Yeah, because I was just basically pointing out some of the problems that, because I told you I still have like my old videos up and such, even like when I was like catechumen and stuff. But all my catechumen stuff I got from like online, because at the church there was hardly anyone that could do it. I mean, they're all like former Protestants or whatever. But that's the thing though, it's like, yeah, like you may have like a better polemic against Protestants, right? Because you have a lot of former Protestants, so that gives you some insight into how they think. But you still have to defend all of this, right? Which I don't think Orthodox apologists are like any better, to be honest. Like, I think a lot of their tradition is just highly contested. I don't know. I mean, if I have time, I'll read from like the books that I got. I still have like, I still have them on my desk. I was just reading over them a little bit as well. But I remember like I have these old videos I wanted to highlight, because it also mentioned like, yeah, it also mentioned Jonathan Hill, right? He's the one that was going over hypothesis and all that. Yeah, he's Orthodox, very intelligent, very like resourceful or so. Like, he had a lot of videos and stuff. Because he also disagreed with J. Dyer, right, on the hypostasis, because J. Dyer and a lot of these apologists were saying this is how I started having problems with Christology, the Orthodox Christology, when you wouldn't say he's a human person for some reason. You would say he's an hypostatized, right, or something like that, that he is without human person, he just possesses a human nature, and so that you're left with the divine person. And so where's all the human experiences are going to go, right? Going to go to the divine person, all these human experiences. But then that would lead to something like heresy, right? Because this is from my old video, and I responded to Militant Thomas. And yeah, like I was saying though, like the Apollinarian thing, right? If I understood it correctly, it's like where you replace the human soul with the divine person, I think. Yeah, but you know that God's not a component of the man or a property of the human being, like, at all, right? And so here's from this word. It's this cheia alone is often translated as living thing or animal, and often nepesh, right, is used in the context of saving your life. Nepesh is referring to an entire person's life, as in Joshua 2:13, Isaiah 44:20. 44:20, 1 Samuel 19:11, Psalm 6:5, 49, 15, 72:13, right? Yeah, basically it's like if you're a true man, right, you have a human living soul, but not only do you possess a human living soul, but you are a human living soul. It's a component of the hypostasis of a man, right? And that's why it means to live the life of the man, is to be that, is to be the life of the man. It's like to be a human soul, to live a human life, right? And it also led into other problems. I'm sorry. It also led into other problems, right? I remember, like, the descent to Hades. Like, I know, like, because these Orthodox and Protestants that I listen to, right, start arguing about PSA, and then it talks about the descent to Hades and all that. And it's like, okay, yeah, but then I can ask, right, this is what I asked before. like the person witnessing to those in Hades, right? Whether it's literal or not, it doesn't matter. Like, is that the divine person of the Logos, or is that the human soul of Jesus, right? The divine person of the Logos, or the human soul of the divine person? Because it's not both, right? Because Hades is supposed to be a place where the souls descend, the human soul. So no, you cannot say that, well, this is proof that God didn't die because God is everywhere, right? Like Protestants just have this weird way of thinking, right? It's because they think because God is all powerful that the limitless one can be, it's almost like you can just speak in this way, right? Like you can just say all these things, because that's what I think. That's what they always like, the objection they tell me, right? These Protestant type. It's like, can God do anything, right? Isn't he all powerful, right? Like, who am I to limit God? But it's like, it's not about limiting God. It's about not being a heretic when you talk about God, right? And I'm like, all of Nicene Christology is just proof to me. It's just one big old proof of how Jesus cannot be God in that way. Like, if the Bible teaches that Jesus is God, it may not even entail the theology of the ecumenical councils. Like, maybe the theology of the councils believe that Jesus is God, but they believe it differently, right? And then maybe in the Bible, maybe he is God, but he's just not in the same context, right? Not in the same way as the ecumenical councils. Because I believe Jesus is God, of course, but I don't mean it that way, though. The way that you believe in this God Son who united himself to human nature. No, I say that it is dependence on the man's unique union with his God, because I'm looking at it from a begotten man who has been born, right, with a unique birth, and he is even the new Adam, and so he has his unique positions, right, to be a right arm of God, and to be the head of all humanity, and to be the Messiah, right? So he has a lot of unique positions, even a unique union. Remember, he has the Spirit without measure. I remember reading that in John, I think. Well, the Spirit is given to everyone else with measure, but to Jesus is given without measure. And so certainly you can say the fullness of God dwelt bodily. And so that all depends on how you tell the fullness of God, the fullness of the deity is manifested or is incarnated through the Jesus, the man, right? That is done through the Spirit, the Son of God and the Holy Spirit, right? Which the Father's revealed through both of them in their union. But this is all predicated on the man's faith as well, right? Because that's included, at least included in that. That's very important. That a man be faithful to God, live a life of faith, and that righteous life is like when he dies a righteous faith, right? Because without that faith, you cannot please God. And it's not righteous without faith. And yeah, like here, is like, that's what it means to, like, why you can say that he can take on this form of God. Because man can have this form of God. They can forgive sins, resurrect the dead. And yeah, I believe Jesus has the power to, Jesus has the power to resurrect himself from the grave. As he says in the, what was it, in that verse? Where he says that that no one can take up my life, I can give it up and take it back as I please, and this is commanded of me and my Father. Now, it's commanded of him, he's being subordinate, but is he being a subordinate God or a subordinate man? Because it's not both. Like, he's supposed to be a subordinate man that has a union with God, that he has faith in God, he believes God's commandments, he obeys them, where Adam disobeyed, Christ, the new Adam, obeyed, right? It's supposed to be parallel like that. That means they operate within the same paradigm and of a man in unison with his God, who believes in his God, does not disobey, right? Now, to me, it's like, okay, well, can't God create a man instead of being a God-man, which is an absurdity? Can God create a man, a new man, that can be tempted and yet not ever fall to that temptation? Like, I would believe that God is powerful enough to do that. That way he may have that unique position of being the Messiah and all that stuff, even defining the new humanity, right? They could be tempted, but it's because he desires God so much. He just willfully obeys and just always will obey and will never fall, right? To that temptation. I don't know, I believe that is more believable than a God-man. Anyway, I'm sorry, I think I went on a little too long. But yeah, I'll read from the books if I have time. So thank you. I'll pause it, I guess.